Who truly rules the Imperium of Man? The Emperor sits upon a golden throne, silent and unmoving. His sons are dead, missing, or lost to time. Yet 10,000 years of war continue without pause. Worlds are erased. Armies are raised. Civilizations are judged. All by men and women whose names most citizens will never hear. They wear no crowns. They command no legions of their own. But with a single decree, they can condemn entire sectors to extinction. They are the High Lords of Terra, and they are the true rulers of the Imperium. Chapter 1. The Throne That Does Not Rule. The Golden Throne screams. Not allowed. IT has no voice left for that. IT screams in radiation and failing systems, in psychic pressure that crushes continents into obedience, in the endless drip of souls fed into its hunger like blood into rusted gears. The Emperor of Mankind sits upon it, motionless, silent as a god reduced to a life support mechanism bolted into the heart of a dying empire. The galaxy kneels to his name, but his hands do not move. The Imperium calls him ruler, but he does not rule. Because an empire does not function on faith alone, IT functions on decisions, on signatures, on orders that condemn worlds before their populations ever know they are guilty. And those orders do not come from the throne. They come from shadows gathered beneath it. Long before the common citizen learns to speak the Emperor's name, long before they understand the meaning of heresy or loyalty, their fate has already been decided by figures they will never see. Men and women who do not wear crowns, who do not march at the head of legions, who will never be remembered in scripture or song. They sit in chambers sealed by adamantium and oaths older than most star systems. They speak in absolutes. They vote in silence. They are the High Lords of Terra, and they are the true rulers of the Imperium of Man. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, at 1,000,000 worlds, uncountable trillions of lives, at a war that has never ended, only shifted shape. No single being could rule such a thing, not even a god, especially not a god entombed. The emperors will survive as doctrine, as dogma, as myth carved into the bones of humanity, but his will is interpreted, filtered, weaponized, and that task falls to the High Lords, a council not born of destiny, but of necessity. They are not one faction. They are not one ideology. They are a convergence of power. Each High Lord represents an institution, so vast it could shatter entire sectors if unleashed unchecked. The Administratum, whose ledgers decide whether a planet starves or survives. The Adeptus Mechanicus, who control the machines that keep the Imperium breathing. The Ecclesiarchy, who command faith with the efficiency of a firing squad. The Inquisition, who answer to no one, and yet sit at the same table. Individually, they are dangerous. Together, they are absolute. And above them all looms a lie carefully maintained for 10,000 years, that they serve the Emperor. In truth, they serve the Imperium. And the Imperium is not a moral entity. IT is not good. IT is not just IT is not even rational. It is survival, stripped of sentiment. When a world rebels, the High Lords do not ask why. They ask how many other worlds might follow. When a sector goes silent, they do not mourn, they calculate. Exterminatus is not an act of rage. IT is an administrative decision. A line crossed in ink, a seal pressed into wax, a world erased, because it was no longer efficient to save. This is governance at galactic scale, and it is cold. But power does not exist in a vacuum. Behind the High Lords, beneath the institutions, beneath even the lie of divine rule, there are figures older than the Imperium itself. Beings who have watched empires rise, burn, and be forgotten, and then watched humanity repeat the cycle with religious devotion. They are the perpetuals, men and women who do not die, or rather, cannot stay dead. They predate the Imperium. Some predate recorded history. Some stood beside the Emperor when Terra was still fractured into techno-barbarian kingdoms, soaked in radiation and blood. They were generals, philosophers, assassins, advisors. And when the Emperor fell silent, they did not vanish. They adapted. The Imperium does not acknowledge perpetuals openly. IT cannot. An empire built on martyrdom cannot tolerate immortals. A faith founded on sacrifice cannot explain beings who outlive consequence. So they are erased from records, rewritten as myths, classified as anomalies, or quietly absorbed into the machinery of power. Some became High Lords, others became kingmakers, some vanished into the Inquisition, shaping policy through whispers and sealed decrees. Others walked away. Unwilling to become custodians of an empire they believed already dead, but their influence lingers, because immortality changes perspective. A mortal ruler fears rebellion, a perpetual plans around it. A mortal administrator worries about legacy, a perpetual worries about stagnation. They do not think in decades or centuries. They think in collapses. The Emperor dreamed of unity. The High Lords enforce continuity. Those are not the same thing. Unity requires belief. Continuity requires control. And control is what the High Lords perfected. They learned that the Imperium does not need hope to function, only momentum. As long as the tides flow, as long as the guard fights, as long as the Astronomicon burns, the machine continues, even if it devours itself in the process, especially if it does. This is the truth hidden beneath the incense and scripture. The Imperium is not ruled by a god. It is ruled by a council that fears change more than extinction, a council that would rather burn 10,000 worlds than risk one idea spreading unchecked, a council that understands the Emperor cannot return and has quietly built an empire that no longer needs him to. The throne is a symbol, the High Lords are the function, and somewhere in the depths of Terra, beneath vaults sealed before the heresy, ancient eyes still watch the machinery turn, patient, immortal, and tired, because they know something the rest of humanity does not. The Imperium is already dead. What remains is simply deciding how long the corpse will keep moving. Chapter 2, The Council of Shadows. The chamber breathes like a tomb. Not air, authority. Old, recycled, steeped in incense and unspoken threats. The walls are adamantium layered with history. Every surface etched with victories no one remembers and purges no one admits to. Light does not fall here naturally. It is permitted, measured, controlled. At the center a circle, not round by accident. Circles have no beginning, no end, only continuity. This is where the Imperium decides who deserves to exist. The High Lords of Terra do not sit as kings, they sit as necessities. Each throne in the chamber represents an institution, so vast it could fracture the Imperium if left unchecked, and so powerful it must be included, even when its presence poisons the air. The master of the administratum, robed in data scrolls and starvation statistics, speaks for a bureaucracy that feeds wars with paperwork and kills worlds with delays. He does not command armies. He commands logistics. And logistics decide wars long before the first shot is fired. The Fabricator General of Mars does not bow to the throne. He cannot. His allegiance is to the machine god, to logic stripped of mercy. Every word he speaks weighs the survival of flesh against the preservation of technology older than most suns. If 1 billion humans must die, so a single standard template construct endures. The calculation is simple. The ecclesiarch sits heavy with faith and blood. His power is belief, raw, volatile, and endless. He does not need soldiers when he can turn entire populations into weapons with a sermon. He does not ask whether something is true, only whether it is useful. Then there is the Inquisition. They do not have a throne. They do not need one. Their presence is enough. This is not a council of unity. It is a balance of threats. Every High Lord exists to restrain the others, not out of trust, but fear. Because unchecked power, even loyal power, is the seed of apocalypse. The Imperium learned that lesson during the heresy, when demigods burned half the galaxy in the name of ideals. The High Lords learned a different lesson. Never allow belief to outrun control. So they vote, they argue, they stall, they maneuver. Not for the good of humanity, but for its continuation in the only form they believe possible. A brutal one. When a sector rebels, the question is not justice.it is precedent. If mercy is shown once, it must be shown again. If rebellion succeeds once, it spreads. So the High Lord decide quietly. 100 billion lives reduced to a line item. A culture erased because its defiance was statistically inconvenient. A Space Marine chapter condemned not because it fell, but because it might inspire others to think they could fall too. This is not cruelty.it is administration. And administration is the deadliest force in the Imperium. The Emperor's name is invoked constantly in this chamber, always reverently, always strategically. But no one here expects him to answer. The High Lords do not wait for visions. They do not seek prophecy. They rule in the Emperor's absence, and over 10,000 years they have learned something dangerous. The Imperium functions better when no one expects a god to intervene. Faith is a resource, hope is a liability. So the myth is maintained. The Emperor protects, the Emperor wills, the Emperor commands. But the orders come from here. This is where crusades are launched not to save worlds, but to redirect pressure. Where wars are prolonged because peace would destabilize supply chains. Where Space Marine chapters are deployed like symbols, not solutions. The High Lords understand optics. They know which victories must be seen, which defeats must be buried, which truths must never leave this room. History is not recorded here, IT is edited. And yet even here, power is not absolute. There are pauses in debate, moments where ancient eyes narrow, where a voice speaks with too much patience. Because some of those seated at the table have seen this chamber before. Not this incarnation, not these faces, but the pattern. Empires rise, councils form, power centralizes, fear hardens into policy, and then it collapses. The Perpetuals know this. Some of them sit among the High Lords, wearing mortal titles like disguises. Others advise from behind layers of proxies and sealed identities. They do not seek control, they seek delay. To slow the fall to guide the collapse into something survivable. Sometimes that means compromise. Sometimes it means massacre. Immortality is not mercy.it is perspective without comfort. The High Lords believe they rule the Imperium. In practice, they manage its decay. They are not villains. They are custodians of a dying thing. And they will do whatever is required to keep it moving. Even if it means feeding it worlds, faith, and truth itself. The chamber exhales. Another vote concludes. Another sector is marked. Outside, the galaxy continues to burn. Inside, the rulers of mankind return to silence. Because silence here is agreement, and agreement is power. Chapter 3, Perpetuals, those who do not end. Blood dries, empires do not. Men die screaming on battlefields, cities burn, stars gutter and fade. And some beings simply stand up again. Perpetuals do not announce themselves. They are not crowned by destiny. They are not chosen by prophecy. They are mistakes in the universe's accounting. Killed, broken, burned to ash, and yet they return. Sometimes immediately, sometimes years later, sometimes somewhere else entirely. Their flesh reknits. Their souls refuse to disperse. The warp does not claim them. Death rejects them like an error it cannot correct. The Imperium does not understand them. That alone makes them dangerous. Before the Imperium had a name, before Terra was unified under a single banner, Perpetuals walked its poisoned continents. They were warlords in the age of strife, scholars when knowledge still mattered, assassins in wars no one remembers because the victors ensured they were forgotten. And among them walked the Emperor, not as a god, not yet, as one of them. This is the truth buried beneath 10,000 years of worship. The Emperor was not unique because he was immortal. He was unique because he understood what immortality meant. Most perpetuals break. Endless life is not a gift. It is erosion. Every century strips away attachment. Every rebirth dulls empathy. You stop seeing individuals. You start seeing patterns. The Emperor saw this early. That is why he acted. Unity was not born from compassion. It was born from exhaustion. Humanity was tearing itself apart endlessly. War after war. Ideology after ideology. The Emperor did not seek to rule because he desired power. He sought to end the cycle, to freeze history that lock humanity into a single, brutal, stable trajectory. No more rises and no more collapses. Only survival. The Perpetuals were divided. Some followed him, believing a single tyrant was better than infinite chaos. Others opposed him, seeing unity as stagnation, control as another form of extinction. They fought, not in grand wars, assassinations, quiet betrayals, decisions that redirected the fate of entire continents without anyone knowing their names. The Imperium was born in their shadow. When the Emperor ascended the Golden Throne, what his physical will was bound into machinery and sacrifice, the Perpetuals faced a choice. Leave, or stay and manage the consequences. Some walked away. They could not bear watching his dream rot into dogma. They disappeared into the void, into forgotten systems, into anonymity. Others stayed, not out of loyalty, out of responsibility. The Imperium without the Emperor required custodians, not believers, managers. Someone had to keep the machine running. Someone had to ensure his silence did not become collapse. And so Perpetuals adapted. They became advisors, strategists, high functionaries whose names changed every few centuries. They learned how to die publicly and return privately, how to wear mortal faces convincingly, how to guide policy without ever being seen to rule. They learned the greatest truth of power. Visibility is weakness. The High Lords believe they govern. That belief is useful. But beneath the institutions, beneath the titles and robes, there are figures who have seen the Imperium born, fracture, and rebuild itself around lies layered, so thick they resemble faith. Perpetuals understand time. They know when to push, when to stall, when to allow atrocity because preventing it would unravel something worse. They are not heroes. They are surgeons operating without anesthesia. This is why the Imperium still exists. Not because of faith, not because of strength, but because beings who do not die learned how to think in centuries. They know rebellion burns fast. They know hope burns faster. They know fear lasts longest. So fear is cultivated. Perpetuals do not sit on a golden throne. They do not command crusades. They shape outcomes. A vote swayed quietly that a rival removed before becoming dangerous, that a truth buried so deeply it becomes myth. They do not preserve humanity as it was. They preserve humanity as it can still be controlled. And yet, even immortals are not immune to regret. Some Perpetuals watch the Imperium and see a corpse animated by habit. They remember a time when humanity still chose its path instead of inheriting it. Others believe this is the only possible outcome, that freedom was always a lie, and survival demands chains. They do not agree. They never have. The Emperor sought to end history. The Perpetuals ensured it continued. Not upward, not forward, but on life support. Endless, grinding, unchanging. And somewhere beneath Terra, in chambers sealed by paranoia and necessity, Beings who cannot die argue about how many must. The galaxy does not know them. It never will. But every decree that ends a civilization, every war that never truly resolves every future that feels inevitable, bears their fingerprints. And time, relentless and patient, continues to watch them work. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Divine Rule. The Emperor does not speak. The Imperium pretends he does. Every cathedral on every world tells the same lie with different incense. That the Emperor watches, that he judges, that his will guides the hand of mankind, but will requires choice, and the golden throne makes none. What remains of the Emperor's presence? Vast, crushing, psychic. A lighthouse of agony burning through the warp so humanity does not lose its way entirely. That alone consumes thousands of souls each day. Not for command, not for judgment, for function. The Emperor protects because he is forced to, not because he rules. The High Lords understand this. They never say it aloud. They never allow it to be written. But policy is built around absence. Because if the Emperor truly ruled, there would be no need for votes, and no need for councils, and no need for compromise. There would be only command. Instead, there's procedure. The Imperium did not drift into bureaucracy by accident. It calcified. After the Horus Heresy, fear replaced vision. The dream of a rational, unified humanity died screaming on the walls of Terra. What survived was caution, institutionalized, weaponized, and sanctified. The Emperor's silence terrified his followers more than his enemies ever had. Silence creates space, and space demands control. So the High Lords filled it. They did not declare themselves rulers. That would have been heresy. Instead, they framed their authority as stewardship. Temporary, necessary, always in service to the Emperor's presumed will. A will that cannot contradict him. A will that cannot intervene. A will that cannot say no. This is the core deception of the Imperium. Not that the Emperor is worshipped as a god, but that his divinity excuses everything done in his name. Every purge becomes obedience. Every massacre becomes mercy. Every lie becomes doctrine. Because a silent god cannot object. The ecclesiarchy understands this better than anyone. Faith does not require truth. It requires repetition. The Emperor is perfect. The Emperor is eternal. The Emperor chose this suffering. These words are not meant to be examined. They are meant to anesthetize doubt, to ensure that when a world burns, its people believe it was necessary, even righteous, especially righteous. And yet, beneath the prayers and banners, even the High Lords know the truth. The Imperium no longer waits for the Emperor to return. It plans as though he never will. This is where the perpetuals become essential, because they remember when the Emperor did speak. They remember his doubts, his arguments, his compromises. They remember that he never intended to be worshipped, and they remember the cost of ignoring him. Some perpetuals believe the Emperor's silence is intentional, that he foresaw this decay and accepted it as the price of survival, that the Imperium, monstrous as it is, remains preferable to the alternatives waiting in the warp. Others believe he failed, that his plan was flawed, that unity without understanding became tyranny by inertia, that humanity traded chaos for slower extinction. These disagreements shape policy more than any sermon ever could. When the High Lords debate extermination, a mortal sees numbers, a perpetual sees trajectories. They remember past empires that tried mercy too late. They remember revolutions that began with hope and ended with oceans of blood. Sometimes they vote for annihilation not because it is right, but because they have seen what hesitation becomes. This is the cruelty of immortality. You stop asking, should we? You ask what happens if we don't. The illusion of divine rule allows this calculus to continue without rebellion, because if the Emperor wills it, resistance is heresy, And if resistance is heresy, doubt is treason. The High Lords do not need to justify themselves. God already has. But illusions require maintenance. Faith decays, stories fracture. Too much suffering breeds questions. So the Imperium distracts. Endless war, endless enemies, endless threats at the edge of existence. If humanity is always one battle from extinction, it will never look inward. This is why peace is dangerous. Peace creates reflection. Reflection leads to comparison. Comparison leads to realization. And realization leads to collapse. The Emperor was meant to guide humanity to a future beyond God's. Instead, he became one, not by choice, but by necessity. And the Imperium learned the wrong lesson. Not how to ascend, but how to rule in the absence of ascent. In the deepest vaults of Terra, there are records sealed even from the Inquisition. Fragmentary transcripts, broken memories, accounts from those who stood beside the Emperor in his final days of movement. They speak of hesitation, of regret, of a man who realized too late that control without trust creates monsters that mistake survival for purpose. The Perpetuals have read these records. The High Lords have not, and so the illusion persists. The Emperor rules, the Imperium obeys, the galaxy burns. The throne hums, the Astronomicon flares, another 1,000 souls are fed into the machine. And somewhere in the endless bureaucracy, a decision is made that will doom a world whose citizens still believe they are protected. Because gods do not rule empires. Systems do. And systems do not care. They endure. Chapter 5. Power without faces. The order is issued without ceremony. No trumpet, and no proclamation. A single data slate changes hands, that a seal is applied, that a world's fate is finalized. No one in the chamber raises their voice, because this is not murder. This is procedure. The High Lords do not rule through spectacle, they rule through distance. Distance from consequence, distance from blood, distance from the screams that follow their decisions like shadows. This is intentional. A ruler who sees the aftermath hesitates, that a ruler who hesitates loses control. So the Imperium ensures its true masters never have to look directly at what they destroy. This is why the High Lords rarely leave Terra, not because they cannot, but because they must not. Terra is insulated by walls, by ritual, by scale. Here, suffering is abstract. Numbers and reports, delays in tithe shipments, deviations in productivity curves. 1 billion deaths become a margin of error. And margins are acceptable. Power without faces is the most stable form of power. When no one knows who ruled, no one knows who to blame. The citizen curses the governor curses the sector lord, the sector lord curses the administratum. The High Lords remain untouched. They are not tyrants in stories. They are never named. They are simply how things are. This is not incompetence. It is design. The Imperium is too large to rule directly, so it rules indirectly, through layers so thick that intent dissolves before it reaches the ground. By the time a decree arrives on a frontier world, it is no longer a choice. It is destiny, and destiny is easier to accept than responsibility. The Perpetuals understand this better than anyone. They have watched charismatic rulers ignite hope and burn entire civilizations with it. They have seen strong leaders centralize power, only for their deaths to fracture everything they built. Faces inspire loyalty. Loyalty inspires rebellion when it is betrayed. So the Imperium removed faces from power. This is why even the High Lords rotate. Tenure ends, titles change, names are struck from records, not because corruption is feared, but because permanence is. A High Lord who remains too long becomes identifiable. Identifiable power invites challenge. So mortality is enforced administratively, even when biology fails. Perpetuals who rise too high learn this quickly. They step down. they disappear. They return under new names, new robes, new masks. Because immortality means nothing if the system notices you. The Inquisition plays its role perfectly here. It hunts individuals. Heretics, traitors, apostates. Never systems. Never structures. The Inquisition is not meant to fix the Imperium. It is meant to remind everyone that deviation will be punished, while ensuring the architecture of power remains untouched. A release valve for rage. A spectacle of justice that never threatens the source. Even Space Marines, those demigods of war, are subject to this faceless control. They are unleashed selectively, publicly celebrated, privately constrained. A chapter that grows too independent finds itself deployed endlessly, bled dry in wars that never end. Another receives resupply delays that cripple recruitment. Another is praised while being quietly isolated. The High Lords do not command Astartes. They starve or feed them. And hunger is more reliable than obedience. This is how the Imperium survives contradiction. It worships heroes while dismantling heroism. .it praises sacrifice while ensuring that sacrifice never ends. .it speaks of unity while engineering fragmentation, so no force can threaten the center. The Emperor once unified humanity through vision. The High Lords maintain it through inertia. And yet, power without faces creates something dangerous. A sense of inevitability. When no one appears to be responsible, resistance loses its target. Rebellion becomes unfocused. Rage turns inward. Cultures decay quietly instead of erupting. This is stability. This is rot. Perpetuals see this clearly. Some believe this is the final form of governance, not tyranny, not freedom, but managed stagnation. A species held in suspension, neither rising nor collapsing indefinitely. Others see it as a slow suicide. A civilization that no longer knows why it exists will eventually forget how. But forgetting takes time. And time is something the Perpetuals have in abundance. So they wait. They nudge. They prune. They allow horrors to happen because stopping them would reveal the machinery underneath. Better a million dead than a billion questioning. Better extinction than awakening. The High Lords believe they are in control. The Perpetuals know control is temporary. What they truly manage is delay. Delay the reckoning. Delay the collapse. Delay the moment when humanity realizes its rulers are not gods, not heroes, not even tyrants. Just administrators of a dying system. The order is archived. The slate is filed. The chamber returns to stillness. Somewhere far away, a planet burns, and no one here learns its name. Chapter 6, The Cost of Immortality. They remember everything. That is the curse. Mortals believe immortality is endurance, that an endless extension of self, that a victory over decay. They are wrong. Immortality is accumulation. Every face lost, every city burned, every promise broken and never revisited. It stacks, layer upon layer, until memory becomes weight, and Perpetuals carry more weight than any throne ever could. A mortal ruler can justify atrocity with ignorance that I did not know that a better choice was not visible. A Perpetual does not have that luxury. They have seen this before. The same patterns, the same fears, the same logic that leads from security to repression, from repression to stagnation, from stagnation to collapse. They know exactly where this road ends, and still they walk it, because the alternatives are worse. The Emperor understood this too late. He believed unity would save humanity from itself, that if war could be ended decisively, if ideology could be crushed under a single truth, humanity could finally evolve beyond its need for gods and kings. He underestimated time. The Perpetuals did not. They knew peace rots without renewal. They knew order decays into dogma. They knew that a single vision, no matter how brilliant, cannot survive millennia unchanged. And when the Emperor fell silent, the Perpetuals faced an impossible choice: let the Imperium fracture, or become complicit in its crimes. Many chose complicity, not because they believed in the Imperium's righteousness, but because they feared the vacuum its collapse would create. They have seen vacuums before. Old Night, the Age of Strife, entire sectors screaming themselves into extinction without any guiding structure at all. Chaos does not need worship to win. It only needs absence. So the Perpetuals stayed. They entered the machinery of power like ghosts slipping into armor. Advisors, strategists, archivists, names that appear once in history and then never again. They learned to compromise with monsters. Sometimes they became monsters themselves. Immortality erodes morality in a very specific way. You stop asking whether an act is evil. You ask whether it's final. Will this end the rebellion? Will this prevent the next war? Will this buy another century? If yes, then the blood is acceptable, because you will still be here to regret it. This is the difference between Perpetuals and the High Lords. The High Lords justify atrocity with doctrine. The Perpetuals justify it with memory. One hides behind faith, the other behind inevitability. Both produce the same outcome. Some Perpetuals tried to resist. They argued for reform, for decentralization, for loosening the grip before it strangled the species. They failed, because systems defend themselves. The Imperium is not a government. IT is an organism, and organisms reject change that threatens stability. Those Perpetuals were marginalized, discredited, forced into exile or silence. Not killed. That would have made them martyrs. Others adapted completely. They learned to speak the language of control fluently. TO wield bureaucracy like a blade. TO erase worlds with a calm hand, because screaming would achieve nothing. These are the Perpetuals the Imperium relies on most. Not visionaries, accountants of extinction. And yet, beneath the calculation, something fractures. Even immortals feel erosion. The longer they stay, the harder it becomes to remember why they once cared. Humanity blurs into statistics. Individual suffering becomes background noise. You tell yourself it is necessary. You tell yourself you will fix it later. Later never comes. This is why some Perpetuals disappear without explanation. They do not die, they withdraw. Into the void, into forgotten systems, into obscurity. Because watching humanity decay under your stewardship is worse than watching it fail without you. Others remain because they believe abandonment is the greater sin. If monsters must rule, better that some of them still remember what was lost, even if remembering hurts, especially if it hurts. The High Lords see Perpetuals as useful anomalies, that long-lived advisors, stabilizing influences. They do not realize how close some of them are to the breaking point, because when an immortal breaks, the consequences are not small. They do not rage, they do not rebel, they plan. The cost of immortality is not boredom, it is patience without hope. And patience, when stripped of hope, becomes something terrifying. The Imperium believes its rulers are cruel because they must be. The Perpetuals know a deeper truth. Cruelty becomes easier when you believe you have already seen the end, and you are still trying to delay it. Chapter 7, The Inquisition's Mirror. The knock never comes. The door is simply open, because locks imply rules, and rules imply permission. The Inquisition does not rule the Imperium. It haunts it, a presence without borders, an authority without oversight, a mandate written in blood and never fully defined. Where the High Lords govern through structure, the Inquisition governs through fear, and fear, when applied correctly, requires very little explanation. They are not judges, they are verdicts. The High Lords like to pretend the Inquisition is separate, a watchdog that a necessary evil that a blade kept sheathed unless absolutely required. This is another lie. The Inquisition is not outside the system. It is the system's immune response. Every empire develops antibodies. Individuals who act when bureaucracy is too slow, when doctrine hesitates, when procedure threatens survival. The Inquisition exists to do what the High Lords cannot be seen doing. Disappear problems, erase narratives, burn truths before they spread. And when blame is needed, the Inquisition is perfect, because no one argues with a ghost holding a rosette. Perpetuals understand the Inquisition intimately. Too intimately. Some helped design it. After the heresy, the Imperium was drowning in paranoia. Traitors hid in plain sight. Faith was fragile. Loyalty was performative. The old legions had shattered trust forever. The Perpetuals saw the danger immediately. A civilization that doubts itself collapses inward. So they proposed something radical. Not transparency, not forgiveness, but terror carefully controlled. The Inquisition was never meant to be humane. It was meant to be absolute. An organization unbound by law, because law was too slow. Unbound by morality, because morality fractured under pressure. Its only guiding principle was survival of the Imperium, not of its people. This is why Inquisitors are chosen, not trained. Chosen for obsession, for certainty, for the inability to doubt once a path is selected. Doubt is inefficient. Where the High Lords see numbers, the Inquisition sees contagion. A cult is not a belief system. .it is an infection. A rebellious governor is not misguided, he is compromised. A population is not innocent, .it is potentially exposed. And exposure demands sterilization. This mindset makes the Inquisition terrifyingly effective. It also makes them blind, because when everything is a threat, nuance becomes heresy. Perpetuals embedded within or adjacent to the Inquisition serve as counterweights or accelerants, depending on temperament. Some restrain excess, others encourage it. They have seen chaos spread like wildfire when treated gently. They have also seen purges so extreme they create the very rebellions they were meant to prevent. The Inquisition does not learn. It reacts. Perpetuals remember. This creates tension. An Inquisitor who has only lived 70 years believes extermination is final. A Perpetual knows it is temporary. The cult will return. The belief will resurface. The pattern will repeat. The question is not if. It is when, and whether the Imperium will be ready. This is why some Perpetuals push the Inquisition toward brutality. Burn the world now. Prevent the war later. Others whisper restraint. Let it fester. Watch who emerges. Learn before cutting. Both strategies have worked. Both have failed catastrophically. The Inquisition believes itself answerable only to the Emperor. The High Lords tolerate this because it keeps the population afraid. The Perpetuals tolerate it because it keeps the Imperium alive. None of them fully control it. That should worry everyone, because occasionally the Inquisition looks inward, and when it does, it sees too much. There are Inquisitors who have begun to suspect the truth, that the Emperor does not guide policy, that the High Lords are not caretakers, but custodians of inertia, that certain advisors never seem to age. These Inquisitors do not last. Their investigations stall, their ships misjump, their files vanish. The Inquisition eats its own. By design, this is the final symmetry. The High Lords rule without faces. The Inquisition enforces without mercy. The Perpetuals guide without attachment. Three forces point one outcome. Endurance at any cost. The knock never comes, because when the door opens, the verdict has already been reached. And somewhere in the Imperium, a truth is erased before it can be spoken. The Inquisition moves on. The machine continues. And the mirror cracks, just enough to let the lie survive. Chapter 8. The War for Tomorrow. The Imperium does not fight for today. Today is already lost. Every war declared by the High Lords is framed as defense. Every crusade is necessity. Every extinction is regrettable but unavoidable. This is untrue. The Imperium wages war for tomorrow, a future that never arrives, constantly postponed by survival itself. Victory is not the objective. Delay is. The High Lords understand something most generals do not. A war that ends creates problems. Veterans return home. Questions are asked. Power redistributes. Peace destabilizes systems built on emergency. So the Imperium does not seek decisive endings. It seeks managed conflict. This is why wars drag on for centuries. Why sectors burn endlessly without resolution. Why enemies are crushed just enough to remain threats. A living enemy justifies authority. A dead one invites introspection. The Guard is fed into meat grinders, not because commanders are incompetent, but because endless mobilization keeps the Imperium aligned. The moment the war machine slows, the fractures become visible. Worlds begin to wonder why they tithe so much, why their sons never return, why Terra never answers. So Terra ensures there's always another front. Perpetuals were the first to understand this. They watched ancient empires collapse not from invasion, but from stagnation after victory. Populations accustomed to sacrifice demanded reward. Rulers accustomed to emergency lost justification. The Imperium learned the lesson brutally. Never allow the war to end. The High Lords do not choose enemies based on morality. They choose them based on sustainability. Chaos is perfect, that IT never truly dies, that IT never negotiates honestly, that IT always returns. Xeno's empires are useful too, especially ones vast enough to threaten, but fragmented enough to contain. The Imperium does not aim to win the galaxy. It aims to outlast it. This is why extermination is selective. Some worlds are erased immediately. Others are allowed to suffer for generations. Rebellion crushed too swiftly becomes legend. Rebellion crushed slowly becomes warning. Fear travels farther than ash. Space Marines are deployed like mythological weapons, not to save worlds, but to shape narratives. A chapter appears that a world survives, the population believes. Elsewhere, no help comes that a world dies screaming, the population learns. Both outcomes serve the Imperium. The Perpetuals see the flaw in this strategy. Delay without direction becomes entropy. You cannot postpone collapse forever. Every century of managed decay increases the eventual cost. But they also know something worse. A sudden end would be catastrophic. The Imperium is too interconnected, too dependent on suffering, too addicted to inertia. Remove the war, and the system cannibalizes itself within decades. So they choose the slow death, because slow death is predictable. The High Lords frame this as stewardship. We hold the line that we buy time, that we preserve mankind. But preservation without evolution is taxidermy. Humanity is alive only in the sense that it still moves. Some Perpetuals argue for risk. Allow reforms. End a war decisively. See what survives. Others remember civilizations that tried the same and vanished into chaos within a generation. They do not argue loudly. They vote quietly. This is why the Imperium's wars feel endless. Because they are not meant to end. They are pressure valves, control mechanisms, narrative engines. The enemy matters less than the function they serve. The galaxy burns not because the Imperium is failing. It burns because the Imperium is succeeding at the wrong objective. Survival without purpose. Every world lost buys another decade. Every genocide postpones a reckoning. Every crusade feeds a machine that cannot stop without tearing itself apart. The Emperor dreamed of a future. The High Lords manage an afterlife. And somewhere in the void, enemies learn the same truth humanity refuses to face. The Imperium is not strong. It is stubborn. And stubborn things endure long past the moment they should have died. Tomorrow never comes. So the war continues. Because ending it would require asking a question no one in power is willing to answer. What is the Imperium for, if not war? The silence that follows that question is more dangerous than any enemy, and so it is never asked. Chapter 9, when the masks slip. There are moments when the system falters. Not loudly, not catastrophically, just enough to reveal what lies beneath. A data stream delays too long that a vote deadlocks, that an Inquisitor refuses an order that should have been automatic. For a fraction of a second, the Imperium hesitates, and in hesitation, truth leaks out. These moments never reach the public. They never reach history. They are sealed, classified, and erased. But they happen, and when they do, the masks slip. The High Lords are not unified. They never were. They are bound together not by ideology, but by mutual terror. Each one knows that if the balance breaks, the Imperium does not fracture neatly. It implodes. The Ecclesiarchy wants faith absolute. The Mechanicus wants flesh secondary. The Administratum wants stability at any cost. The Inquisition wants permission to burn first and ask never. And beneath them all, the Perpetuals watch these competing hungers grind against one another like tectonic plates. Pressure builds. Sometimes, High Lord pushes too far. A crusade overextended, a purge too public, that a doctrinal shift that threatens another institution's survival. That is when accidents happen. A shuttle misfires during transit, that a gene curse manifests suddenly, an inquisitorial audit uncovers irregularities. The Imperium does not assassinate its rulers. It corrects deviations. Perpetuals understand how fragile this balance truly is. They remember when the Emperor still walked and still struggled to keep his own generals aligned. Even then, with his will present and undeniable, unity was an illusion. Now, without him, unity is maintenance. There are whispered stories within the deepest vaults of Terra. Not records, memories passed from one immortal to another. Stories of times when the High Lords nearly revealed themselves. Once, during a sector-wide famine, an Administratum Lord proposed redirecting relief fleets from Shrine Worlds to Manufactorums. The logic was sound. The optics were not. The Ecclesiarchy threatened schism. The Mechanicus threatened withdrawal of support. The Inquisition threatened exposure. The proposal vanished, as so did the Lord. The famine continued. Another time, an Inquisitor uncovered fragments suggesting the Emperor's silence was not entirely involuntary, that the Golden Throne was as much prison as life support. The investigation reached Terra. It never left. The Inquisitor's name is not recorded, but the Perpetuals remember him. These fractures are not failures. They are stress tests. The Imperium constantly probes itself, identifying weak points before they grow dangerous. Ideas are allowed to surface, just long enough to be measured, then crushed. This is not paranoia. It is adaptation. Yet adaptation has limits. The Perpetuals can feel it. A subtle acceleration, crises overlapping instead of spacing out. Wars that consume resources faster than they replenish. The old delays no longer buy as much time. Entropy is catching up, and with entropy comes desperation. The High Lords have begun making decisions that would have been unthinkable centuries ago. Entire sectors written off preemptively. Technologies once sealed now reconsidered. Doctrines bent so far they verge on contradiction. Not because they want to, because the margins are thinning. When the masks slip, what is revealed is not evil. It is fear. Fear of collapse, fear of awakening. Fear that humanity, if allowed to see the truth, would tear the Imperium apart faster than any Xenos invasion ever could. The High Lords fear humanity more than its enemies. The Perpetuals understand why. Because humanity does not rebel out of hatred. It rebels out of hope. And hope is uncontrollable. There are perpetuals who believe the end is approaching. Not an apocalypse, not final battle, but exposure. A moment when too many truths align, when too many lies fail simultaneously, when the Imperium can no longer pretend it is ruled by a god, guided by justice, or sustained by purpose, only by habit. Others believe the Imperium has survived worse. They remember Old Night. They remember terror and ruins. They remember when extinction felt closer than it does now. They argue this is just another contraction, another ugly century, another delay. But even they admit something has changed. The cracks are staying longer. The silences are heavier. And sometimes, in the chambers of power, someone asks a question they should not aloud, just with their eyes. The masks slip, only for a moment, but in that moment, the truth is visible. The Imperium is not collapsing. It is being held together by hands that are starting to tremble, and trembling hands eventually let go. Chapter 10, The Throne Without a God. The Golden Throne endures. That is the lie. What endures is the system built around it. The throne itself is failing. Slowly, inevitably. Its mechanisms are relics layered atop relics. Technologies no one alive truly understands, maintained by rites mistaken for maintenance, and prayers substituted for knowledge. The Mechanicus keeps it alive not through mastery, but ritualized desperation. They do not repair it. They appease it. The Emperor is not asleep. He is not waiting. He is contained, bound into a psychic engine whose sole function is to burn endlessly, so that humanity can navigate the warp without tearing itself apart. His consciousness is fragmented, stretched across dimensions, pinned in place by pain and necessity. This is not rulership. This is sacrifice without end. The High Lords do not discuss this openly. They cannot, because the moment the Imperium understands that the Emperor is no longer a guiding will, only a sustaining force, the entire theological foundation collapses. If the Emperor does not rule, then obedience is optional, then suffering is unjustified, then the High Lords are exposed. So the lie must persist. The ecclesiarchy insists the Emperor chose this fate, that his suffering is deliberate, that his silence is divine wisdom beyond mortal comprehension. The perpetuals know better. They remember the man. They remember his anger, his impatience, his refusal to be worshipped. They remember that he never intended to become a god, and that becoming one is what broke everything. Some perpetuals believe the Emperor is still aware, that somewhere beneath the layers of pain and psychic static, he watches what his dream has become, that his silence is not an ability, but horror. Others believe his mind is shattered beyond recovery, that what remains is instinct, reflex, a beacon screaming into the warp because stopping would doom humanity instantly. Either truth is unbearable, so neither is acknowledged. The High Lords rule around the throne. Every decision is framed as service to it, while ensuring it never interferes. They consult astrologers, psychers, and auguries, not to seek guidance, but to confirm what they have already decided. The Emperor's will has become a justification engine. Whatever must be done is declared aligned with him. Whatever threatens the system is declared heresy. This is why reform is impossible. To change the Imperium would be to admit the Emperor's design failed. And if the Emperor failed, then everything built atop him is illegitimate. The High Lords would rather burn the galaxy than confront that truth. Perpetuals understand the paradox. If the throne fails, humanity loses the warp and collapses into isolated, dying pockets of civilization. If the throne continues, humanity remains shackled to a corpse god and a system that cannot evolve. There's no good outcome, only worse ones. Some perpetuals have contemplated the unthinkable. Not killing the Emperor, that would be mercy, but ending the Imperium, allowing humanity to fracture, to suffer, to possibly evolve into something new, even if most of it dies in the process. These perpetuals are watched carefully. Hope is the most dangerous heresy of all. Others cling to the throne as the last anchor. They believe as long as it burns, there is still time. Time to guide humanity subtly. Time to delay the worst excesses. Time to prevent chaos from consuming everything outright. They accept damnation if it means postponing oblivion. The High Lords suspect none of this, or suspect it and refuse to know. They see the throne as immovable, as eternal, as justification. They do not consider what happens when it finally fails, because there is no contingency. The Emperor once sought to free humanity from gods. Now humanity cannot survive without one screaming in agony beneath its capital. This is the final irony. The throne hums. Another soul is consumed. Another decree is signed in its name. And the rulers of mankind continue their work beneath a God who no longer rules, and may no longer even forgive. Because when the throne finally goes silent, there will be no judgment, only consequence, and the galaxy will learn what the High Lords have always known. The Imperium was never ruled by a god, only by fear of what happens without one. Chapter 11. The end that is never spoken. No alarms will sound. There will be no great revelation, and no single moment where the Imperium realizes it has reached the end, because the Imperium does not end in explosions. It ends in continuation. Every perpetual knows this. The final collapse of an empire is never sudden. It is a quiet stretching of systems past their limits, followed by a refusal to stop even when those limits are gone. The Imperium has mastered this art. It does not break. It frays. The High Lords speak often of vigilance, of eternal war, of holding the line. But beneath those words is an unspoken understanding. There is no victory condition anymore. No restored golden age, and no rebirth of reason, and no return of the Emperor as he once was. Only maintenance. Endless, grinding maintenance. This is why the Imperium fears answers. Answers create endpoints. Endpoints create expectations. And expectations demand fulfillment. So questions are discouraged. Curiosity is punished. Memory is rewritten. Because an empire that admits it has no future must confront the present. And the present is unbearable. The Perpetuals have debated this among themselves for millennia. Not in councils, not in chambers. In passing glances, in silences that last decades, in the decision not to intervene one more time. Some believe the Imperium has already crossed the threshold where saving it is indistinguishable from preserving suffering, that every century gained costs more than the last, and yields less. Others argue that extinction is not mercy, that humanity, broken and cruel as it is, still deserves the chance to exist, even in chains. There is no consensus. There never has been. What frightens the Perpetuals most is not chaos. Chaos is honest. It devours openly, it corrupts loudly, it promises power and delivers damnation without apology. The Imperium is subtler. It kills in the name of survival, it destroys in the name of order, it lies in the name of truth, and it convinces its victims to thank it. This is why the end is never spoken, because speaking it would make it real. To acknowledge that the Imperium cannot be saved would force a decision no one wants to make. Let it rot forever, or let it die. The High Lords choose the first option instinctively. They do not see themselves as villains. They see themselves as the last dam holding back annihilation. Every sacrifice is justified because the alternative is worse, or so they believe. The Perpetuals know the flaw in this thinking. A dam that is never released does not prevent flooding. Ensures the collapse will be total. Somewhere in the depths of Terra, there are contingency plans sealed so deeply they have never been opened. Plans for evacuation, for fragmentation, for controlled collapse. They are centuries old. No one has authorized them, because authorization would be an admission of failure. The Imperium continues, because stopping requires courage it no longer has. Not the courage to fight, the courage to change. This is the final tragedy of mankind. It did not fall because it was weak. It endured because it was afraid to let go. The throne continues to burn. The High Lords continue to rule. The Perpetuals continue to watch. And the end continues to approach, not as a cataclysm, but as an inevitability quietly woven into every decision made in the name of survival. When the Imperium finally dies, there will be no last words. Only records that stop updating. Only wars that no longer receive reinforcements. Only silence spreading outward from Terra like frost. And the Perpetuals will still be there, because they always are, watching humanity reach the conclusion it has been delaying for 10,000 years, and wondering, quietly, whether delaying it was ever mercy at all. Chapter 12, Silence After Rule. It will not be remembered. That is the final cruelty. When the Imperium ends, whether by fracture, exhaustion, or a scream loud enough to shake the warp itself, there will be no single moment historians can point to and say here. No final edict. No last High Lord standing defiant before annihilation. The Imperium will end the way it ruled. Quietly, incrementally, in denial. A fleet will not arrive where it was promised. That a tithe will never be collected. A world will call for aid and receive nothing. Not even silence, but absence. And that absence will spread. Like rot, like frost, like the void reclaiming what was never meant to last. The High Lords will not see it coming. Not because they are foolish, but because their entire existence is built on preventing acknowledgement of endings. They are managers of continuity, not architects of futures. By the time they realize the machine cannot be maintained any longer, there will be nothing left to maintain. Their chambers will still be sealed. Their votes will still be cast. Their decrees will still be signed. But no one will be listening. Power, once absolute, will echo into emptiness. The golden throne will fall silent. Not dramatically, not mercifully. One system at a time. One sacrifice, too few. One failure, no right can reverse. And when the Astronomicon gutters out, humanity will finally understand how small it has become. Isolated, blind, alone. The ecclesiarchy will call it a test of faith. The Inquisition will call it sabotage. The Administratum will call it a logistical anomaly. But the Perpetuals will know the truth. The delay has ended. Some Perpetuals will try to intervene one last time. T.O. gather remnants. T.O. preserve knowledge. T.O. seed something new from the ruins. Others will walk away. They have done this before. They know how it ends. Humanity will fracture. Not cleanly, not heroically. Petty tyrannies will rise. Warp storms will isolate civilizations. Xenos will feed. Chaos will laugh. And somewhere in a forgotten system, a remnant of mankind will tell stories of a golden age that never truly existed. They will be wrong, but the story will help them survive. The Emperor will not rise. He will not judge. He will not forgive. What remains of him will finally be allowed to end, not as a god, not as a king, but as a man who tried to save a species and failed. The Perpetuals will feel that moment more keenly than any other, not because of grief, but because it will confirm what they have always feared. That immortality does not grant wisdom, only endurance. The Imperium believed itself eternal. That belief sustained